They told me not to spend more than 5 minutes alone in room 502. I laughed it off. I was there for content, an overnight investigation at Waverly Hills Sanatorium in Louisville, Kentucky, one of the most infamous tuberculosis hospitals in the US. The tour guide, Jen, was dead serious when she said it. People get sick in there, nosebleeds, panic attacks. Some say she doesn't like cameras. She? I asked. The nurse, Jen replied. The one they found hanging from the light in 1928. Young, pregnant, unmarried. Room 502. Hours later, the others were setting up in the body chute tunnel. I went up to the 5th floor alone, camera on a shoulder rig, shotgun mic picking up every echo. My viewers love raw ambiance, so I let it roll. The hallway to room 502 was worse than any horror set. Peeling paint hanging like dead skin, windows black with night. The only light came from my flashlight and the red tally light on the camera. The door to 502 was already open. No wind, no draft, just open. Documenting the famous room now, I whispered, more to steady my own nerves than for the audience. This is where a nurse supposedly hanged herself from the light fixture after discovering she was pregnant. I stepped inside. The room was smaller than I expected. Just broken glass, a rusted bed frame, and that naked light mount on the ceiling, long since stripped of its bulb. I set the camera on the tripod, aimed at the ceiling. If anyone's here, I said, you can show yourself on this camera. Silence. Then, distant, down the hallway, 3 slow, deliberate footsteps. Jen? I called out. No answer. My flashlight flickered just once. But when it came back, the room felt narrower, like the walls had leaned in a few inches. My chest tightened. The air smelled faintly of something metallic and sour, like old blood and hospital disinfectant baked into concrete. I looked up at the empty light mount. Something swung there. It wasn't solid. More like a darker shape inside the dark, a long vertical shadow that moved as if hanging from the ceiling. But my light wasn't moving. My camera wasn't moving. Only that shadow gently swayed back and forth, back and forth. My skin went cold from the inside out. I grabbed the camera to zoom in, hands shaking so hard the rig rattled. Through the viewfinder, the shadow sharpened. I could make out the curve of shoulders, the tilt of a head, the suggestion of feet dangling above the floor. Okay, I whispered. Okay, that's enough. I see you. I get it. Every hair on my arm suddenly stood up. Behind me, inches from my ear, a woman's whisper slid out of the dark. Get out. I spun so fast the tripod clattered to the ground. The doorway was empty, but the sound of something brushing past me, like a skirt or an apron, moved from the door to the window. The temperature dropped hard. I could see my breath spill out in front of me in long, shuddering clouds. My nose started to run. I wiped it with the back of my hand and saw red, a thin smear of blood. That broke me. I grabbed the camera, didn't even bother with the tripod, and bolted out of room 502. As I hit the hallway, there was a sudden, loud bang behind me, like the door had been kicked shut. Except when Jen and I went back up there later with the group lights on, the door was open again. No one had touched it. We pulled the footage the next day. In the raw audio, just before my nosebleed, a woman's voice came through, clearer than I remembered. Don't film me. Then, a second voice, deeper, distorted, right against the mic. Hang. On the video, as I look up at the ceiling, the empty light mount is visible. But there's one frame, literally a single frame, where you can see a woman in a nurse's uniform hanging there, face turned toward the camera, eyes wide open and black. The next frame, she's gone. We slowed it down, zoomed in. Her features are distorted, like the film itself is buckling, but you can still make out the shape of a cap, an old-fashioned collar, and what looks like a swollen line around her neck. I never released that frame. I deleted it from the teaser. Some things you don't tempt twice. But I kept the original card locked away because in the corner of that frame, reflected in the broken window, there's someone else standing in the room with her. Someone who wasn't there. Someone standing exactly where I'd been. They call him the King. At Pennhurst State School and Hospital in Pennsylvania, that nickname doesn't belong to a living person. It belongs to whatever is supposed to haunt the boiler room in the basement of the Mayflower building, an old maintenance man, according to the legend, who still patrols his underground kingdom with a cigar and a bad temper. I didn't believe any of it, not until the night I had to lock the place alone. At the time, Pennhurst was running night tours and seasonal haunts. I was hired as a cameraman to shoot some promo footage. Wide angles of broken hallways, actors in straitjackets lunging at paying customers. The usual. We wrapped around 2 a.m. Everyone else left in a rush. There was a storm coming in, and nobody wanted to be on those back roads when the rain hit. The site manager tossed me a set of keys. Just make sure everything's locked. Don't go down to the boilers, and don't give him any trouble. I thought he was joking. He wasn't smiling. The main buildings groaned around me, wind punching through broken windows, exit signs flickering. I did a quick sweep with my DSLR recording, the autofocus hunting in the dark. Then I found the door, heavy steel, half rusted, at the end of a side hallway. Boiler room, authorized personnel only. The handle was cold, freezing actually, like it had been sitting in ice. When I tested it, it turned easily. Just a quick shot, I told myself. Basement, pipes, atmospheric B-roll, in and out. The staircase down was narrow and steep, walls sweating, the air getting thicker with every step. By the time I reached the bottom, it smelled like wet concrete and smoke. Not dust, not mildew, tobacco smoke, fresh. I rounded the corner and saw it. A long concrete chamber, boilers like hulking black animals along one wall, pipes crisscrossing overhead like ribs. On the floor, scattered near one of the boilers, were dozens of cigarette butts arranged in a rough circle. Some were new, some were ancient and crumbling. The little house of horrors. I lifted the camera. Documenting boiler room at Pennhurst, I whispered. My voice sounded wrong, too small. Smell of cigar smoke present, no visible source. Something tugged at my shirt, just a little pinch at the back, like a grumpy uncle getting your attention. I spun around, nearly dropping the camera. No one there? The stairs were empty, but now the smoke was thicker, hanging low, just above head height. My eyes started to water, and beneath the smoke, in that heavy silence, I heard it. Slow footsteps scraping along the concrete, coming from behind the boilers. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Hello? My voice cracked. Sir, the building is closed. If you're here, I'm just filming. I'll be out in a second. The footsteps stopped. For a moment there was nothing, just the dull tick of cooling metal. Then from behind the nearest boiler, a small orange ember floated up, like the tip of a cigar being drawn on. It glowed brighter, then dimmed. The smell hit me full force. Thick, old-world cigar smoke, the kind that sticks to everything. My head swam. The camera rolled, capturing the ember as it moved through the air at chest height, then up, as if someone were standing there taking a slow drag. I raised the viewfinder to my eye. Through the lens, the ember wasn't floating alone anymore. There was a shape attached to it, a black silhouette in a workman's jacket, features barely visible like they'd been smeared across the sensor. His head was turned toward me. I couldn't see eyes, just two pits of deeper darkness. "You're not supposed to be here," I whispered. The figure moved. Not a step, not a lunge, just a tiny tilt of the head, like a king considering a trespasser. Then my throat closed. No hands touched me. Nothing wrapped around my neck, but invisible pressure clamped down, crushing my windpipe, forcing my knees to buckle. The camera tilted sideways, catching the spinning concrete floor, the scattered cigarettes, my own hand clawing at nothing. I could hear him walking toward me. The footsteps were right in my left ear, slow and deliberate. Scrape, scrape, scrape. The cigar ember hovered inches from my face. The smoke burned my eyes, made them stream, but in the blur I saw a flash of something metallic. Keys hanging from his belt. The keys the old maintenance staff would have worn decades ago. "You don't belong down here," a voice rasped inside my head. It wasn't sound. It was like an echo pressed into my skull. The pressure on my throat vanished. I fell forward, coughing, sucking in stale air. When I looked up, the ember was gone. The smoke was clearing. The boiler room was just a basement again. I ran. I left the lights on. The basement door unlocked. Everything. I drove home, shaking so badly I could barely fit the key into my own front door. Later, reviewing the footage, I saw what the camera had picked up as I was being choked. For 3 frames, as the image shakes, there's a figure standing over me. Tall, broad-shouldered, one boot on the floor, the other braced on a piece of broken pipe like he's posing, a king on his throne, and in those frames my hands aren't around my own throat. Something else's are.
I didn't go to Beechworth Lunatic Asylum in Victoria, Australia, for ghosts. I was there for the history, 128 years of it. 1,000+ patients, many locked away for reasons that wouldn't even raise an eyebrow today. But by the end of the night tour, history was the last thing on my mind. Our guide, Liam, led us through long, echoing corridors at Mayday Hills, the old name for the asylum, telling stories about the people who never left. He talked about the resident children, whose laughter workers still heard in empty halls, and the patient who escaped, only to be found weeks later, decomposed in a tree, his leg missing, chewed off by the asylum dog, if the legend is to be believed. But the one that stuck with me was Matron Sharp. She'd been strict but kind, he said, one of the few staff members the patients trusted. Now people claim to see her walking the granite staircase, moving between the old dormitory and classrooms, checking on people who weren't there anymore. We reached the base of that staircase just before midnight. The lights were off. Liam only used a single lantern. The stone steps rose into a tunnel of darkness, the handrail cold and smooth from decades of hands. "We've had people see her here," he said quietly, sometimes just out of the corner of their eye, sometimes clearer. The group shifted nervously. I hung back, raising my phone to grab some audio and low-light video. Above us, something tapped across the landing. It could have been old wood contracting in the cold. Could have been. Liam took us up in single file. Halfway, the temperature dropped, like someone had opened a freezer door. My breath puffed out in tiny clouds. I glanced down. No one else's did. At the top, the staircase opened into a wide landing, and then the old dormitory. Long rows of empty rooms, their doors yawning open. Liam led the group ahead, but I stayed at the landing, drawn toward a side window overlooking the grounds. I heard it then, a child's whisper, right behind me. "Are you with Matron too?" I turned slowly. There was no one. The rest of the tour group was a good 20 meters away, clustered around Liam. No kids on the tour tonight, just adults. I swallowed. Who said that? The air behind me shifted, like someone had stepped closer. A light pressure brushed my sleeve, the whispering voice moving past my ear. "She says we have to go back to bed." I spun around again and froze. On the far end of the landing, framed by the entrance to the dormitory, stood a woman. She wasn't translucent. She wasn't glowing. She looked as solid as anyone in our group, wearing an old-fashioned nurse's uniform and a long, dark skirt. Her hair was pulled back under cap. Her hands were folded in front of her like she was about to scold a rowdy patient. But the light was wrong. Liam's lantern didn't reach that far. There was no external light coming through the windows. and yet I could see every crease in her uniform, the faint shine on her shoes. She turned her head toward me. Her expression was tired, not angry, not demonic, just exhausted in a way that went straight to the bones. I tried to call out, but my voice stuck. She lifted one hand, palm down, and made a tiny downward motion, like a teacher telling a classroom to settle. Behind me, the children's laughter cut off instantly. The silence that followed was thicker than any noise. I blinked. She was gone. I heard footsteps running up the stairs. One of the other guests, a woman in her 30s, arrived at the landing, pale and shaking. "Did you see her?" she hissed. "The lady on the stairs?" Before I could answer, a boy's voice drifted from the dormitory behind us. "I told you Matron Sharp was here." Liam's lantern swung around, catching a little boy standing alone in the doorway of one of the rooms. We all stared. There were no children on this tour. The boy wasn't with us. He looked about 10. Old-fashioned clothes, bare feet on the wooden floor. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "James!" Liam whispered, more to himself than anyone, like he recognized the name. There's an old story about a tour where a boy claimed he'd been talking to a child named James who used to live at the asylum. The kid tilted his head. "Matron says it's lights out." Every bulb in the corridor flickered on for half a second, blazing white, then burst simultaneously. We were plunged into blackness. People screamed. Liam's lantern went out too, flames snuffed like fingers pinching it. Something moved between us. A shape brushing past, skirts swishing softly, firm footsteps heading toward the staircase. In the dark, a calm woman's voice, right by my shoulder, spoke clearly. "Back to your beds." And for a heartbeat, the granite under my feet felt like a thin layer of stone over something else. A whole building full of people, restless and unseen, shifting in their old beds as Matron Sharp did her rounds. The lantern flared back to life on its own. The landing was empty. No boy, no nurse, just shattered glass from the blown bulbs and a corridor that felt like it was holding its breath. I checked my recording later. The video was distorted near the landing, static crawling across the frame. But in one still, taken just after the bulbs popped, you can see a tall woman in a nurse's uniform halfway down the stairs, one hand on the rail, looking back over her shoulder. And on the step below her, just one small, bare footprint,